The howl did not come from any wolf. It came from the Moon Council. As 100 ancient silver bells rang across the Hall of Unity, every Alpha King in attendance instinctively rose to his feet. Then the impossible happened. The eldest council elder pointed beyond the royal throne, not toward the undefeated warrior, not toward the legendary generals, toward the quiet Luna standing alone near the back of the chamber, Luna Celeste, Evermoon. The hall all fell into stunned silence. Elder Seraphine's voice echoed beneath the towering marble arches. The moon has chosen. A murmur swept through hundreds of rulers. Alpha King Alexander Ashborne frowned. This summit had one purpose. Within a single day, the council had to appoint one supreme ruler to unite every kingdom before an ancient catastrophe awakened beneath the moon peaks. If no united command existed by tomorrow night's full moon, the ancient barrier protecting the continent would collapse forever. One kingdom might survive, none would remain free. And if you believe the greatest battle in this story will be fought with swords, stay with us. Because the woman every noble dismissed as a political bride is about to accomplish what no undefeated alpha has achieved in centuries. Alexander looked toward his wife. Celeste lowered her eyes. There must be a mistake. Elder Seraphine slowly shook her head. The Moon Council has never mistaken the voice of destiny. Several powerful alphas immediately objected. A Luna cannot command the United Kingdoms. She has never led an army. She is only the daughter of a minor pack. Alexander remained silent. He had married Celeste 5 years earlier to preserve a fragile alliance. She had never demanded influence, never sought recognition, never once complained when duty carried him away from the palace for months at a time. Yet as accusations filled the chamber, not one elder withdrew their support. Instead, every member of the ancient Moon Council stood together. Then, one after another, they bowed, not before a king, before Luna Celeste. Alexander's heartbeat slowed. For the first time since their marriage, he wondered whether he had ever truly known the woman standing beside his throne. 5 years before the Moon Council bowed before Luna Celeste, almost no one remembered her name. They remembered the treaty. They remembered the royal wedding. They remembered the armies that never marched because 2 kingdoms had chosen marriage instead of war. But no one remembered the quiet young woman standing beside Alpha King Alexander. To most nobles, she had never been a queen. She had simply been the price of peace. On the morning after the wedding, Alexander rode south to negotiate a border dispute before sunrise. Celeste watched the royal procession disappear beyond the palace gates. No farewell banquet followed, no celebration, only silence. An elderly maid approached carefully. "Your Majesty, the Royal Council requests your seal on these household records." Celeste accepted the documents with a gentle smile. Of course, that smile would become famous among servants. Not because it demanded loyalty, because it expected nothing in return. Within weeks, Celeste quietly discovered that dozens of palace servants had not been paid fairly for months. She corrected every record herself. No announcement followed. The servants simply found their wages waiting exactly where they should have been. When questioned, the royal treasurer searched for the order. He found only the queen's signature, nothing more. Months later, harsh winter struck the northern valleys. Food shortages spread rapidly among several small packs. The Royal Council debated taxation for nearly 3 weeks. Celeste never attended the arguments. Instead, she sold nearly all the jewelry gifted during her wedding. The money purchased grain, medicine, blankets, seeds for spring planting. The relief wagons arrived carrying only the royal crest. No one knew who had paid for them. Alexander never learned the truth. He remained on distant battlefields defending fragile borders while reports reaching the capital praised military victories. Every celebration welcomed him home as the undefeated Alpha King. Meanwhile, another kind of victory quietly unfolded beyond the palace walls. Each week, Celeste visited Moon Sanctuary. The orphanage stood beside an ancient lake surrounded by silver birch trees. Children abandoned by war, famine, and disease called it home. Unlike visiting nobles who arrived with musicians and photographers before quickly departing, Celeste always came alone. She cooked meals, repaired torn blankets, read stories until frightened children finally fell asleep. One little girl named Iris asked the same question every visit. "Will you still come next week?" Celeste always answered exactly the same way. "Unless the moon calls me elsewhere." "I will come." She never broke that promise. Years passed. The children stopped calling her Your Majesty. They simply called her Aunt Celeste. She liked that title much more. Far beyond the capital, old rivalries continued poisoning relationships between neighboring packs. Blood feuds survived longer than the wolves who started them. Whenever violence threatened, Celeste quietly traveled without royal escorts. She carried no sword, no army, only tea leaves, fresh bread, and patience. She listened far more than she spoke. Sometimes grieving fathers needed someone willing to hear their pain. Sometimes frightened young alphas only wanted one person to believe reconciliation remained possible. More often than not, that person became Celeste. Many agreements officially credited the Moon Council. Few realized the first conversations had begun around simple wooden tables, where Celeste shared humble meals with families who believed no ruler cared about them anymore. She never corrected the misunderstanding. Recognition had never been her purpose. One autumn afternoon, Sister Liana found Celeste repairing a broken wooden toy outside the orphanage. "You could ask craftsmen to make 100 new ones," Celeste smiled while carefully sanding the rough edges. "This one already belongs to someone." "A new toy cannot replace a treasured one." Liana quietly watched the queen continue working. Then she asked the question many wondered, but few dared speak. "Does it never hurt?" Celeste looked up. "What?" Giving so much without anyone knowing, the queen considered the question for a long moment. Finally, she answered softly, "If kindness only exists when someone applauds, then it was never kindness." Liana never forgot those words. Neither did the children listening nearby. Hidden beneath the oldest wing of Moon Sanctuary rested something almost forgotten by history. An ancient circular chamber carved directly into pale stone. Its ceiling displayed thousands of silver stars surrounding one enormous blossom, the moon blossom. Only Elder Seraphine still remembered its true meaning. One evening, she invited Celeste into the chamber. The first queens once gathered here. Celeste traced the ancient carvings with quiet curiosity. "They were warriors?" Seraphine gently shook her head. "No. They prevented wars." She pointed toward the blossom. "This is the Moon Blossom Covenant. It teaches that the greatest ruler is not the strongest wolf, but the one every wounded heart willingly follows." Celeste remained silent. The elder smiled knowingly. "Most people think leadership begins when others recognize your greatness. The moon teaches the opposite. True leadership begins when no one is watching." The silver blossom suddenly reflected moonlight pouring through a narrow opening above. For only a heartbeat, the ancient symbol glowed, then faded. Seraphine lowered her head respectfully. It has not answered anyone for centuries. Neither woman realized they had just witnessed the first sign. Outside the sanctuary, another pair of eyes watched from the darkness. Duke Lucien Blackfang quietly mounted his horse. "So, the council has finally noticed her." He turned toward the capital. "Then she becomes dangerous." Far away, Alexander celebrated another military victory. believing he had spent 5 years preserving peace through strength. He did not yet understand. Someone else had been protecting that same peace, one quiet act of compassion at a time, and the Moon Council had been watching every single one. The scent reached him before the truth did. Alexander had crossed countless battlefields. He had smelled iron after war, smoke rising from burning fortresses, fresh snow covering forgotten graves. He knew every instinct an Alpha King could trust. Yet nothing prepared him for the quiet fragrance drifting through the Hall of Unity. Wild moonflowers, rain after summer heat, the faint sweetness of silver pine carried by the evening wind. His wolf froze, then a deep, ancient purr vibrated through his chest, not from triumph, recognition. Alexander slowly turned toward Celeste. She stood exactly where the Moon Council had left her, calm, silent, almost overwhelmed by the attention surrounding her. Their eyes met. Electric warmth surged through his entire body. His pulse thundered. Every ancient instinct awakened at once, because she had become more beautiful, because for the first time in 5 years, he truly saw her. Commander Orion stepped closer. "Your Majesty." Alexander barely heard him. "My wolf." "It has never reacted like this." Across the chamber, Elder Seraphine quietly smiled. The ancient mate bond. Several nobles frowned. Alexander looked toward her. "We were married years ago." "You were. But marriage and recognition are not the same." Silence settled across the chamber. The moon never forces hearts to awaken before they are ready. The bond waited. It waited until you understood who your Luna truly is. The words struck harder than any weapon. Alexander remembered every campaign, every military victory, every ceremony celebrating his achievements. Then another memory surfaced. Every time he returned home, Celeste greeted him with the same peaceful smile, never asking why he had been away so long, never complaining, never demanding recognition. He had mistaken patience for simplicity. Another pulse spread through the bond. This time, Celeste staggered. She pressed one hand against her heart. Alexander reached her before anyone else. "Celeste." "I am all right." Her voice remained gentle. "It is only unfamiliar." Their hands accidentally touched. Silver light flashed briefly beneath their fingertips. The hall gasped. The moon blossom mark upon Celeste's wrist slowly awakened. Delicate silver vines spread across her skin before fading once more. Elder Seraphine raised her staff. "The covenant accepts her." Duke Lucien stepped forward immediately. "This proves nothing. A mark can be forged. A council can be manipulated." High Alpha Magnus nodded. "If she deserves to lead every kingdom, then show us one victory worthy of that honor." Alexander instinctively moved beside Celeste. His wolf no longer saw a political wife. It saw its true Luna. Before he could answer, Sister Liana entered the chamber carrying several worn leather journals. She bowed before their council. "You requested evidence," Seraphine nodded. "Please begin." Liana carefully opened the oldest journal. "For 5 years, Queen Celeste has personally funded 19 orphan sanctuaries." She turned another page. "She negotiated peace between 11 rival pacts before any formal treaties existed." Another page. "She anonymously rebuilt 6 villages after winter famine." Another. "She paid medical debts for hundreds of families." Another. "She established safe roads through territories once controlled by raiders." The chamber grew quieter with every sentence. Lucien interrupted. "Words. Nothing more." Commander Orion stepped forward carrying military reports. "Then perhaps the royal army can assist." He placed several sealed documents before Alexander. Every successful campaign depended upon supply routes. He pointed toward the maps. These roads remained open because neighboring pacts voluntarily protected them. Alexander studied the records. The signatures beneath every agreement stunned him. Celeste, Evermoon. Entire military victories suddenly appeared different. His armies had marched safely because someone had already healed generations of hatred before the soldiers ever arrived. He looked at his wife. "You never told me." She lowered her eyes. "You were already carrying enough burdens. I did not wish to become another." Alexander felt shame settle heavily inside him. He had believed he defended the continent alone. In truth, his greatest victories had rested upon invisible foundations his wife quietly built. Elder Seraphine addressed the assembly. "You celebrate warriors who end battles." She turned toward Celeste. "We honor the woman who prevented them." The chamber remained silent. Then the enormous bronze doors opened once more. Messengers covered in dust hurried inside. They fell to one knee. Elders. "The northern kingdoms." "They have agreed." Another messenger entered. "The eastern river pacts as well." A third followed. "The southern clans." "They all swear the same oath," Seraphine asked quietly. "To whom?" The exhausted messenger looked directly at Celeste. "They refuse to unite under any sword. They will follow only the Luna who healed them, before asking them to trust." Even Magnus failed to answer. The impossible had become undeniable. The kingdoms had already chosen. The council had merely recognized what ordinary people had known for years. Then, the crystal dome above the Hall of Unity shimmered. Moonlight poured downward. Thousands of silver petals formed from pure light drifted slowly around Celeste. The moon blossom mark glowed brighter than ever before. No elder spoke. No ritual began. The moon itself had answered. Alexander gently took Celeste's hand. This time, the ancient mate bond awakened completely. Warm silver energy surrounded them both. His wolf no longer purred. It bowed, not out of submission, out of reverence. Alexander finally understood. He had spent years trying to become the greatest alpha king in history. All the while, history had been quietly walking beside him, and he had almost failed to recognize her. Outside the Hall of Unity, far beyond the palace walls, Duke Lucien and High Alpha Magnus exchanged one final glance. "If the moon has chosen her," Magnus said coldly, "then we will remove the moons chosen before sunrise." Their rebellion had already begun. The first sword was never drawn. The first betrayal was. Before dawn touched the eastern towers, Duke Lucien stepped into the center of the Hall of Unity and pointed directly at Luna Celeste. "She has deceived every kingdom," his accusation echoed beneath the crystal dome. "A woman without military victories cannot unite the continent." High Alpha Magnus unsheathed his enormous runed greatsword. "Then let the strongest decide." Several Alpha Kings immediately reached for their weapons. The chamber erupted. Steel flashed. Voices collided. Ancient alliances shattered within seconds. Alexander moved without hesitation. He stepped between Celeste and every drawn blade. "No one touches my queen," Magnus laughed. "You defended treaties. You defended borders. But today," he raised his sword toward Celeste, "you defend weakness." Alexander slowly drew the moon-fang blade. "No. I defend the future." Outside, war horns exploded across the capital. Boom, boom, boom. Commander Orion burst through the palace doors. "Your Majesty! Lucien's private armies have surrounded the city." Another messenger followed. The Western nobles have declared rebellion. A third. Mercenary packs are advancing from the southern pass. The continent had reached the edge of civil war. Lucienne smiled. Look around. No one will kneel before a forgotten Luna. Before Alexander could answer, the great bronze doors opened, not with soldiers, with ordinary people. An elderly shepherd entered first. Behind him came village elders, midwives, blacksmiths, merchants, teachers, farmers. They quietly filled the enormous chamber. None carried weapons, only memories. Lucienne frowned. What is this? Sister Liana stepped forward. They requested permission to speak. Seraphine nodded. They have earned that right. The elderly shepherd bowed toward Celeste. When wolves destroyed our flock during the harsh winter, you brought food. You never told anyone. A village teacher spoke next. When disease closed our school, you stayed for 3 weeks teaching every child yourself. A merchant lifted a weathered ledger. My caravan survived because neighboring packs protected our road. They agreed only after Queen Celeste reconciled our families, one after another. Voices rose, not praising power, remembering kindness. Each story became another stone in a bridge no army had ever built. Lucienne shouted over them. Stories! Sentiment! They mean nothing, a quiet voice answered from behind him. They mean everything. An elderly Alpha King slowly removed his crown. I fought 6 wars. I won every battlefield. He looked toward Celeste. She ended the hatred that caused those wars. He placed his crown upon the marble floor. Then he bowed. Another Alpha King followed, then another. Soon rulers from kingdoms across the continent lowered themselves before the quiet Luna, not because they had been ordered, because they had already chosen. Magnus roared in fury, I will never kneel! His wolf exploded from his body, massive, scarred, towering over every warrior nearby. Panic swept across the chamber. Alexander transformed instantly. Midnight black fur burst across his body. Golden eyes ignited. The Alpha King met Magnus head-on. Their collision shook the palace. Stone pillars cracked. Moonlight shattered through stained glass. Magnus attacked first. One crushing strike, Alexander blocked. Another, a third, the palace floor splintered beneath their claws. Outside, thousands of rebel soldiers charged through the royal gates. Commander Orion raised his sword. Royal Guard! The defenders answered. Steel clashed, shields locked. The capital became a battlefield. Inside the hall, Magnus drove Alexander backward with overwhelming strength. You cannot save everyone, Alexander's wolf growled. I do not fight alone. As if answering those words, the impossible happened. Silver light spread beneath Celeste's feet. The moon blossom mark awakened completely. Ancient symbols flowed across the marble floor like living streams of moonlight. The crystal dome above the chamber burst into radiant silver brilliance. Every elder stood. Every member of the Moon Council raised their staffs together. The covenant, Seraphine whispered, has accepted its guardian. The silver light poured outward, across the capital, across the hills, across the rivers, far beyond the city walls. Every allied pack lifted its head toward the sky. Then they came. Thousands of wolves, not summoned by command, drawn by faith, from northern forests, western valleys, southern plains, eastern mountains. Entire packs raced toward the capital, not to conquer, to protect. Rebel soldiers stopped fighting. They watched in disbelief as wolves from rival kingdoms stood shoulder to shoulder without hostility. Lucienne's face turned pale. Impossible. Have hated one another for generations, Seraphine answered quietly. They stopped hating. The day she taught them how, Magnus refused to surrender. He charged directly toward Celeste. Alexander intercepted him. The impact thundered across the chamber. For one endless moment, neither alpha moved. Then Alexander's wolf surged with renewed strength, not born from anger, from purpose. One decisive strike, Magnus's greatsword shattered. A second, the enormous alpha crashed onto the marble floor. His wolf dissolved. Silence. Complete silence. Lucien slowly stepped backward. Every noble who had supported him lowered their weapons, not because they feared Alexander, because they finally understood. The moon had never chosen the strongest warrior. It had chosen the one who had already united the continent long before anyone noticed. Alexander returned to human form. His armor was cracked, his face streaked with blood and dust. He walked back toward Celeste without speaking. He took his place beside her. Not in front of her, beside her. The United Kingdoms saw the gesture and understood. From that moment forward, the battle was no longer about protecting a queen. It was about protecting the hope she had already given the world. The last rebel banner fell before the first light of dawn touched the palace towers. Silence swept across the Hall of Unity. Broken weapons lay scattered across the marble floor. Cracked shields rested beside extinguished torches. The battle was over. The hatred was not. High Alpha Magnus struggled to rise once more. Blood stained the shattered remains of his ceremonial armor. His sword lay broken several steps away. Still, pride refused to surrender. "You won," he coughed heavily. "Because the council stood behind you," Alexander slowly approached. "No," he looked toward Celeste. "I won because she spent 5 years removing the reasons people wanted war." Magnus lowered his eyes. For the first time in his life, he had no answer. Across the chamber, Duke Lucien attempted to slip quietly toward a hidden passage. Commander Orion blocked his path. "There is nowhere left to run." Royal guards surrounded the disgraced noble. He glanced desperately around the hall. Not one alpha stepped forward to protect him. Not one noble defended him. The alliances he had spent decades purchasing had disappeared in a single night. Elder Seraphine raised her ancient staff. "The Moon Council has heard every accusation." She turned toward Lucien and witnessed every betrayal. Sister Liana entered carrying dozens of sealed journals gathered from Moon Sanctuary. Behind her came village elders, merchants, teachers, pack leaders. Each carried written agreements bearing Celeste's signature. Each document represented another conflict, peacefully resolved. Another village rebuilt. Another family reunited. Another war that never happened. The evidence covered an entire ceremonial table. Lucien stared at the growing mountain of records. So, it was all true. An elderly pack leader nodded quietly. "My son lives because Queen Celeste crossed 3 mountain ranges during a blizzard to negotiate peace." A merchant spoke next. "My grandchildren eat because she secretly reopened our trade roads." A gray-haired healer stepped forward. "When plague returned to our valley, she arrived before any royal physician." One testimony followed another. Not dramatic, simply honest. Alexander listened in silence. Every sentence uncovered another year of his wife's hidden sacrifices. He remembered returning from victorious campaigns. Crowds had cheered his name. Songs celebrated his courage. Meanwhile, the woman waiting quietly beside the palace gates had already saved lives no battlefield ever could. His victories had always been visible. Hers had never needed witnesses. A weight settled upon his heart. Not guilt alone, humility. He finally understood why the Moon Council had never hesitated. Elder Seraphine addressed the assembly. Strength protects kingdoms. She looked toward Celeste. Compassion gives them the future. No one argued. Even the defeated rebels remained silent. Commander Orion escorted Magnus and Lucien before the council. Alexander stood before them. There will be no executions. A murmur spread through the chamber. Magnus looked up in disbelief. Lucien almost smiled. Alexander raised one hand. Do not mistake mercy for freedom. His voice carried calmly through the hall. You both tried to divide nations already learning to trust one another. You will spend the rest of your lives restoring every village damaged by this rebellion. You will rebuild schools. You will repair sanctuaries. You will carry food before you ever carry another weapon. Magnus slowly lowered his head. I accept. Lucien's shoulders collapsed. History would remember him, not as a ruler, as a warning. Royal guards quietly escorted both prisoners away, outside. Morning sunlight finally poured through the broken crystal dome. Silver light illuminated the Hall of Unity. Celeste walked slowly among wounded soldiers, friend and former enemy alike. She knelt beside each one, applying bandages, offering water, speaking gentle words. She never asked which side they had fought for, only whether they still breathed. Alexander watched every movement. His armor remained cracked. Dark crimson stains marked his gauntlets and breastplate. He had defeated countless warriors throughout his life. Yet nothing before him required greater courage than the next few steps. He removed his royal sword. He placed it upon the marble floor. Next came his crown. Then the heavy black cloak carrying the crest of House Ashborne. Every symbol of authority rested at his feet. The entire hall watched, without hesitation. Alpha King Alexander Ashborne lowered himself onto one knee before the woman he had married out of duty. His voice trembled. Celeste, I believed I was protecting our kingdoms. I never realized you had been protecting my heart. Tears gathered in his eyes. I celebrated victories earned by armies. You celebrated lives that never needed to become casualties. I asked the world to recognize me. You asked nothing from anyone. He bowed his head. I underestimated the greatest ruler I have ever known. Silence filled the chamber. Not uncomfortable, sacred. Celeste knelt before him. With gentle hands, she lifted his chin. You never failed, because you lacked strength. She smiled through quiet tears. You simply had not yet learned. That healing is also courage. Alexander could no longer speak. He rested his forehead against hers. Around them, every Alpha King slowly knelt, then every elder, then every commander, then every citizen inside the Hall of Unity. Not because protocol demanded it, because gratitude did. Far above the shattered dome, moonlight pierced the morning sky. Silver petals drifted gently through the chamber. The Moonblossom Covenant had never sought the strongest ruler. It had always waited for the kindest one. 1 year later, no kingdom measured greatness by the size of its army. They measured it by how many former enemies now shared the same table. The United Continent had entered an age unlike any recorded in its history. Trade flourished. Border fortresses became schools, battlefields transformed into orchards. Children born after the Great Council had never heard the sound of wolves marching to war. They knew only the songs of peace. At the heart of that new beginning stood Luna Celeste. The Moon Council gathered once more beneath the restored crystal dome. This time every Alpha King arrived willingly, not to compete, to celebrate. Elder Seraphine stepped forward carrying an ancient silver crown woven with living moon blossoms. For 1,000 years, she declared, this crown has waited for the ruler who united hearts before kingdoms. She gently placed the moon crown upon Celeste's head. The silver blossoms shimmered beneath the full moon. Across the chamber, Every moon blossom carving awakened with soft light. No voice questioned the choice. No noble protested. The continent had already witnessed the answer. Alexander stood beside his queen, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. He took her hand with quiet pride. I once believed duty brought us together. He smiled. Now I know destiny simply waited for me to open my eyes. Celeste's gentle laughter filled the hall. Then let us spend the rest of our lives helping others do the same. Outside the palace, Duke Lucien and High Alpha Magnus continued rebuilding the villages damaged by their ambition. Every home restored, every bridge repaired, every orchard replanted. Their punishment reminded every kingdom that true justice did not exist to satisfy revenge. It existed to restore what hatred had broken. As moonlight spread across the United Kingdoms, wolves from every pack lifted their voices together. For the first time in generations, not a single howl carried the promise of war. Only hope, only unity, only home. Perhaps history remembers great kings for the battles they win, but future generations remember great queens for the wars they prevent. If you had been one of the Moon Council elders, would you have chosen the undefeated Alpha King, or the quiet Luna who united every kingdom without drawing a sword? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable werewolf romance stories filled with courage, compassion, destiny, and hope beneath the moon.